Hi everyone. Well, I've decided to start making YouTube videos, and for my first video, I'm going to show everybody how to assemble a computer. This is going to be an in-depth video, um, going over all the different kinds of little things that might be useful when you're building your first computer, or if you build a couple of them, but you're still not an expert that built hundreds of computers. So this is going to be an in-depth, long, possibly a two-part video, and we're going to get right to it and start building a computer for 2021 with the newest technologies, the new types of cases. I mean, this will be. There's a lot of videos like this out there, but I thought since I've been doing this for such a long time, I might as well make my own, and hopefully it'll be useful to whoever's watching. Enjoy. Um, So we're gonna start with unboxing our case. Let me just adjust this camera. There, that should be good. Uh, we will be using the LANCool 205M case. It's a micro ATX case, along with a ASUS B450M plus 2 motherboard. We will be also pairing that with a Ryzen 3 1200. I'm aware that this is not a new CPU, but to illustrate the process of building a machine, this will do. And of course, since this is a video for 2021, we will be using an NVMe SSD as our primary storage. This is not the best or the fastest option out there, but it makes sense. Also, we will be using only one stick of memory. So it is possible to upgrade later if you're building something similar to this, although with probably a newer processor. So let's go ahead and open this case. That might be useful. A little bit more lighting. Okay. This is a pretty nice case for 59 bucks at Micro Center as of right now. And it has a tempered glass side panel, which is, I mean, it's nice if you like to put some lighting in your case. I mean, I'm not a fan of lighting in the case, but it's becoming more and more difficult to avoid lighting. So we're gonna take this side panel off. And the other one as well. Okay, so we have our instruction manual for the case here. It goes in depth of how to work with this particular case. Um, most cases today are built differently than they used to be, uh, like back in the day, maybe 5, 10 years ago, where the power supply was on top. Now the power supply is on the bottom, and it's and in different manufacturers have a different way of doing this. Some manufacturers, some case vendors, I mean, have don't have anything in between this where the power supply goes and where the motherboard is installed. So so in those types of situations, you can mount the power supply either facing up or facing down if there's a vent. In this particular case, if the fan is facing up, it's not going to be grabbing any air because there's not a good there's no way there's no good way for air to get into a fan that is facing up, but there is a vent on the bottom. So we'll be installing our power supply fan down in this particular case. So let's see what we have here. They give us some zip ties and screws that we will need, and some of these rubber mounting adapters for the 2.5-inch drives that would go here and here. And this area over here can fit 2 3.5-inch drives. Okay. We have the front panel connector, which was the power button, the reset button, as well as the storage activity LED and the power LED. The front panel audio, which is the audio that goes into the motherboard, and the USB 3.0 front panel connection. This has a magnetic air filter on the top. It has an air filter on the bottom where the intake for the power supply is, but it's not magnetic, so we can take that out for now. We can put it back in later, set that to the side. So that way when we're working with the case, don't accidentally grab it and kind of wrinkle it or damage it. So it's good to take the stuff off. Let's see. So let's open up our motherboard. Like this, and we could temporarily put this cover back on while we work on the motherboard. There it is, and the motherboard comes with an I/O shield for the back. Some of the newer higher end motherboards have this integrated already, but this is more of a low to mid-range motherboard, so we don't have that kind of feature. SATA cables, stickers, certificate of reliability, and the manual. We'll be looking, and the drivers, but the drivers will probably be downloading the latest versions from the internet when we're going to be installing the operating system. And the manual will be a little bit useful for us. If the manual for your motherboard is not available because you got it secondhand or you bought a used computer and you want to repurpose some parts, PDFs are available at the manufacturer's site, so that way you'll know where to plug in the front panel connectors. That is the only reason the manual is useful, to just tell you where to properly connect the the front panel power button, reset button, and the LEDs. Put this on the anti-static bag it came in. I'm going to use the empty box for everything that we want to keep after the build, like a little miscellaneous, possibly the mounting mechanism, the original one, as well as any extra screws and cables that we have, possibly the manuals, so that way in case we ever need any of that stuff at a later date, we'll have it available. So we'll start with installing the components on the motherboard. We'll be using the standard AMD stock cooler that came with the Ryzen 1200 CPU. This has already been used before, but has been cleaned. You can use rubbing alcohol to clean off any thermal material, thermal paste that has been previously used, or any thermal padding. It comes off with rubbing alcohol fairly easily. There's our CPU that we'll be installing. Now, since we have this clip over here, the mounting mechanism, what we want to do is remove this, and this particular cooler will be screwed in directly into the back panel that already comes with the motherboard. You do not want to lose these original mounting brackets or mounting, well, this mechanism over here, these two pieces, along with the 4 screws. So we're going to remove them. That's removed right there, and we want to keep these somewhere safe, so let's just put them into our box. This mounting back plate is not attached. It's not, there's no adhesive or anything, so it'll just fall off if you pick up the board. So be aware of that. Of course, different CPUs will have different mechanisms to mount them. This is an AMD socket AM4 system, and this is how they are usually shipped. The higher end CPUs have a stock cooler that is shipped with them that utilizes that mechanism that I just removed. So you definitely don't want to lose it if you're going to upgrade your CPU, if you're in a situation where you have this CPU cooler that you're going to be using, and then you want to use a different cooler for any reason. You do not want to lose those components. So let's install the CPU. We'll just open the latch, and there is a little arrow on the CPU. Let's see where. Can't seem to get the focus right. There's that arrow. No, the arrow's right here. And that arrow goes to the arrow over here on the motherboard. Can't really see it very well with my camera. Oh, there we go. Let's see if I can show you that little arrow. Sorry about this. This is my first video, so there. Okay, and this here you can clearly see the arrow that was pointing on the bottom left corner of the socket. That's where the arrow is. Oh, there it is, right there. So we match up that arrow with this one on the CPU. Let me see if I can get that into focus properly. There's that arrow. Get a slightly better view maybe. There. So that one gets aligned with the one on the socket, and then we have a properly mounted processor. It is very important to do this carefully because you do not want to bend any of your pins. If the pins are bent, it is possible to straighten them back out, but they'll never be the same again. There's a chance of them breaking off, and once a pin is broken off, well, the processor cannot be, even if it will work, it cannot be called reliable after that point. So it could seem to work, but something is not going to work properly, like a memory channel will be missing, or uh, weird behavior that is not expected. Um, for the thermal paste, if you buy this new and you don't have, you never used it before, it comes with its own pre-applied thermal interface material that is on the heatsink. Uh, the quality of it is not that good, but if you're not overclocking and you just want to use the computer with default settings, it should be just fine to use that. But since this is not a new processor, we'll use this Noctua NTH1 thermal paste that I have left over from a previous build. Now, there's many arguments about what the best way to apply thermal paste is. For this particular processor, it doesn't matter too much because there is no chiplets that are spread around the board, and the actual package is pretty small. So I give it a I have been using this method for a long time. It has never failed me. Just put a generous amount in the middle, and the pressure of the cooler will spread it out evenly, making sure there's no air pockets for super hot air to accumulate and possibly overheat or damage your CPU. Uh, Even though modern CPUs do have thermal protection built in, but superheated air pockets may not trip the safety mechanisms of the CPU and still cause damage in the short or long term. So you definitely want to do this correctly. There's plenty of other videos that you can check to show how people recommend applying thermal paste, but this is my way and it works just fine. Now, when you're mounting, installing the cooler, make sure you go straight down, so that way the thermal paste will spread out evenly. And what I like to do is start screwing in and not screw each screw at the same time, but maybe give a few turns on each one diagonally from each other, so that way the cooler will be going down and making contact evenly. There it is. There it is. So I'm just gonna give it just a little bit, and don't use too much force when tightening these screws. Once they're tightened, they are good because they have springs that will hold the cooler in place and won't let the screws come loose. Okay. Next step. Next step, we can check how to install the memory on the motherboard using the instruction manual. This is a small instruction manual. We can just browse right through it and see how this particular motherboard chipset accepts the memory. So on this page, we see that if you're installing one stick of memory, it should be going into DIMM slot B2. And according to the diagram, it's the outermost slot. And there's also markings on the motherboard, and this is indeed slot DIMM B2. Yes, B2 right here. So that's where our memory will be going into. Find that stick of memory. There it is. Now, motherboards can have memory slots that clip that have retention mechanisms on both ends or on one end, and the other one just has a little spring that holds this. So it would be in this kind of motherboard, I would gently slide it into the left one first, and making sure the one on the right is opened, and then once it is flushed, ready to go into the slot, once it's ready to go to the slot, give it a gentle push from both sides, so it'll go right in and make a click. This should be good. Yeah, this is good. So now we will be installing our NVMe SSD. The screws that came with our motherboard. This is here. Mounting brackets. There it is. So this came with the motherboard. Let me try to focus this a little bit better. This is a a screw and a mounting sand-off for the NVMe. We have the NVMe slot over here, and the the slots to mount different sized NVMe SSDs. So what we can do, I'll open up this NVMe SSD. So you can see, we would install it this way, and we will need our mounting standoff in that spot right there, the third one. Now, let's see if this will work. I have a tool that's specifically works with these motherboard sand-offs, as well as this little sand-off for the NVMe. You could use a little plier to tighten it beyond just hand tightening it. When you're tightening a screw, make sure you don't over tighten it. On tighter tolerances screws, no more than 10 degrees after it goes, maybe 20 degrees after it can't be tightened by hand anymore, just so that it stays in place. Over tightening could lead to a stripped screws, and we wouldn't want that. There. So we have the NVMe SSD in the socket. It will be pushed down, and then we can tighten it. Put our screw in. Again, about 20 degrees after it, you can't tighten it by hand anymore. And our NVMe SSD is installed. We can plug the case, the CPU cooler in. There's a header for it on the motherboard. It's labeled CPU fan. And our motherboard CPU, memory, and NVMe storage is ready to be installed into the case. So I'm just going to set this aside. And we're going to need these. So let's see what kind of screws they gave us with this case. These are the sand-offs that come with the case, where we will have to install them in order to mount the motherboard into the case. Now there's two major sizes of screws when it comes to like regular computers. There is the smaller threaded ones and the larger ones. I'm not sure of the exact size. I'm sure you can look them up fairly easily. These are the two different sizes of screws. Now, when you're going to be screwing the motherboard into the case, before that, if you're not sure, check which screws, the larger ones or the smaller ones, would be screwing into the sand-offs, because some vendors have these sand-offs accept the larger screws, and some of them have the smaller screws. So this particular case has accepts the smaller screws into the sand-off where we'll be installing the motherboard. Now, if we try to install a larger one, it won't go through. It won't go in. It will go just a little bit, and then, I mean, this is where some people could make a mistake. If you've never done this before, you could force a bigger screw into this, but it's not the right way to do it. You'll damage the sand off, and you'll damage the screw, and it'll be difficult to remove. If A lot of problems could arise if you don't use the right size screws when you install the motherboard. So make sure I have actually here, I've set aside a different sized sand off. This is from a different motherboard, and this accepts a larger screw. It works just fine for this particular sand off. No, that's not the one. Ah, here it is. Found it. Okay. So this is a different sand off, and it uses a larger screw. So make sure that you're using the correct screw for this. And also, there are some screws that have some, let me see if I can show you here. Some of these kind of rigid, maybe if I can grab a different screw that's not black, you can see it a little bit better. I have a bag of different screws over here. Now, no, this could seem pretty trivial, but a lot of first timers may not know this. So I would like to go in depth about this potential issue. So let me find the appropriate screws. I may not have one of these available. So, when you're installing the motherboard, the screws that you want to use are the ones that do not have any of that rigidity that is on the other side of the motherboard, that's facing the motherboard. You want this side of the screw to be smooth. You do not want a screw like this. Oh, like this, yeah. You can actually see it on this one, where these little notches that are on the screw, they're unnecessary, and they could cause a little bit of damage in your mounting hole on the motherboard. So you don't want to use these when you're mounting uh, your motherboard into the case. So we have an appropriate amount of sand-offs as well as the screws, but I've set aside some different screws and sand-offs, so that way the only reason for that is so they'll be better visible in the video, hopefully. So let me try to get this into focus. There we go. Where to install? Where to install the sand-offs? Each motherboard could have slightly different configurations. You can check where the holes are by pretty much eyeballing where to install the sand-offs. The back panel I/O goes in the back, so that's how you would know where to mount your sand-offs. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 mounting holes on this motherboard, so we'll go ahead and install these sand-offs into the appropriate locations. First, we'll hand tighten them. Okay. Then, if you don't have this particular tool, you could use a small plier to just tighten them no more than 20 degrees after they're flushed with the back panel of the case. This one wasn't flushed, so I'm giving it a little bit more turns. Remember not to over tighten to strip your thread. So this one was not going in easily by hand. So there, it's not going any further. Just give it a little bit of tightening. There it stops, and then just a little bit of tightening, and that's it. We are good. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sand-offs. And the motherboard that will be going in this way. Now, before we install the motherboard, we need to install our I/O shield. There it is. And this will be going in like so. So, when you're installing your I/O shield, make sure that there's these little, I'm not sure what they're called, like parts of the I/O shield will be coming out, and what you want to do is either bend them back away from the um, connector, so that way they will not go into the connector itself when you're mounting when you're installing the motherboard into your case. So I leave them as is and slide the motherboard at an angle, so that way they'll end up resting on top of of the the connector and not go inside of it. Like this HDMI connector could either this little thing can go inside of the HDMI connector, and if you're using it will not function properly. So make sure that these little I/O shield, now how would I call them? The pieces of metal that are left over from the manufacturing go don't go into the actual connector themselves, like this. Let me see if I could. There. Make sure it's like this and not like this, where this little connector goes into the socket itself. So that's just a little bit something that extra information for anybody who's new to assembling computers. we have our I/O shield installed correctly into the back of the case. Now we are ready to install the motherboard. Put this fan, case fan connector out of the way. Somehow there. Good enough. Let's try to bring this into better focus. And the motherboard will be going in. Be very gentle, try not to drag the bottom of the board on the sand-offs. Let's see if we didn't get that. And we got that little piece of I/O shield into our socket. And you know what would make more sense? I think if we would bend it back just a little bit, so that way we don't risk damaging the board by dragging it across these sand-offs in order to get the perfect angle to make this go over the connector and not go inside the connector. So put this back in. Make sure it's going in correctly. There. I was just trying to align the rear I/O panel with the I/O shield properly. This is good. We make sure that our mounting holes on the motherboard are flushed, are aligned with the sand-offs that are installed into the case. And then we could go ahead and screw in the first screw. And then we can, before screwing in the rest of the screws, we could check to make sure it's aligned correctly and everything on the back rear I/O is correctly aligned. make sure not to tighten these particular screws more than, I'd say, about 60 degrees or so. And let's see if anything is okay. There goes the screwdriver. So this I/O shield is bulging out. This isn't how we want this to be. So what I'm gonna do is remove the motherboard for a minute to see what would be causing this. As you can see, this video is not scripted and not sponsored by anyone, so if there's an issue, no, then we'll resolve it as we go along. Because if you're going to be buying parts um, that are new and you're not familiar with them, so this is very likely to happen. Like little bumps. So let's see what was causing this issue. This is going up. And, let's see if we put this on our board. What's causing the issue for it to bulge up? Well, it seems to be okay when we just hold it to the board. Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay, this time it went in a bit smoother. Let's see if we have a bulge on the rear I/O. There's a small bulge here. Not sure what's causing it not to flush with the board. It should be okay. All right, this is okay. So we'll start. Now, I have these little little red uh, pretty much cardboard or paper. I'm not sure what they're made of. Washers that I put in between the screw and the motherboard to kind of keep the board mounting holes in good shape. If I decide to, I don't know, uninstall it later down the line and perhaps sell it as used on eBay or anywhere else for that matter. So that way it's in good condition. This is completely optional. I just have a lot of them left over from all the years I've worked. So since I have them, I'll use them. If you don't have them, it's fine. They are not needed. Just adjust that a little bit. Screw in. That into better focus. Up, dropped it in there upside down. Okay, so in cases like this, it's good to have a magnet. I just have a bunch of old hard drive magnets that I removed when destroying hard drives that were on the way out, never to be used again. I just removed the magnets and destroyed the platter. So these are really strong magnets, and we can grab our screw easily. Here's another little trick. If you put a magnet on your screwdriver like this, it will be magnetized. You can hold your screw in place and it's not going to fall off the screwdriver. So we can do that. That's good. Two more screws. I've seen a lot of people strip these screws and then it's difficult to remove the board after. They want to upgrade it or for any other reason, just maybe change the cooler. So this is, I can't stress enough. When I first started building computers, I used to over tighten a lot of stuff until an engineer told me not to tighten more than 90 degrees the past the past where you can't hand tighten it anymore. So 90 degrees past hand tightening, it is not always the right amount. So in some cases, I mean, uh, 10 degrees is fine. Like on the motherboard when we were installing that NVMe SSD sand off right over here. So different screws have different tolerances. Uh, like hard drives, for example, they have really tight tolerances, and you would not want to over tighten that. That could break the screw off and the hard drive itself and leave you with just a head. Uh, it could strip the inside, so I can't stress it enough. A lot of people make this mistake. I used to make this mistake, and I wouldn't want anybody to do that. So, we have our motherboard installed into the case. It's nice and it's nice and how would I say it? It doesn't wobble or move anywhere, so it's good. We got a good motherboard installation. On the other side, we can see that this case gives us access to the back plate. So if we want to swap this cooler out, and for one that has a different back panel, I mean, usually AMD boards, AM4 boards, they do not have they use the back plate that comes with the motherboard for any third-party coolers. Mm, this could vary. So the the good thing is you don't need to uh, remove the motherboard in case you want to change cooling for any reason. Even if you have like an Intel board where you do need a third-party um, backplate that would come with the cooler. So let's see. Everything's installed here. As you can see, these new cases don't even have 5.25-inch drives for optical drives. It's just this is the front. That's it. It's just a solid piece, and there is holes on the sides for air intake because there's an air intake fan in the front and and a fan in the back for the exhaust. So for this particular build, this is fine. You can also put an extra fan in the front and a couple of extra fans on top, which we'll not be doing for this case. This is a very minimal build. Now, next thing we're going to do is the power supply. What are our options? What kind of power supply is good? And it is very important. This has been said many times, and I'll say it again. Uh, you should never skimp on the power supply. That doesn't mean you have to buy the most expensive 1000 watt or 1200 watt or whatever if you don't need that amount of power, but a reliable power supply is very important. There's three types of power supplies. There is the non-modular power supplies where all the connectors are already installed and you can't like plug in only the wires that you need. So this is all non-modular Corsair CX500 power supply. These are usually the cheaper ones. the non-modular ones. Doesn't mean they're bad, but they're just non-modular. So this 500 watt power supply would fit perfectly fine into this build. We also have this kind of power supply, which is semi-modular power supply, where we only have the motherboard ATX power connector and the CPU power connector. That is non-modular, and the rest of the connections are modular. So if we need a cable for our video card, we can just connect that and not have any excess of cables connected. What else? And then there is the higher end fully modular power supplies. So this is for a different build, but I want to show this to you anyway. If we open up this power supply, some zip ties and screws, and the unit itself. This is a fully modular power supply. So you can connect anything you need and not connect what you don't need. So all the cables come with it. Now, here is something that you should be aware of when you are using modular power supplies. These cables, they are not industry standard. So the cables that you get are for your specific power supply that they come with. I have two power supplies here. One of them is the previous partially modular power supply that I showed you. And this is the fully modular power supply that I just opened from the box. Now, these cables from the old power supply, as you can see, I have all the cables from the fully modular power supply here. I'm just going to close this right there. Now, they're both Corsair. Different models. This is an RM 850. And this is a CX 550M. This is the cable for the PCI Express power that came with the CX 550M. Can plug it in. It plugs in. I can use the same cable and I can plug it in into this power supply and it fits just fine. But there's no guarantee that this will work properly. And there is a risk that you can damage your components, your power supply, cause an electrical short, or who knows what can happen. But you have to use the cables for a modular power supply that came with that particular specific unit and not mix them around between power supplies, even if they're from the same vendor, like both of these are Corsair. I would never use this cable from this CX550M on this RM850 ever. Never do that. So I thought this was important for me to stress about which power supplies, the types of power supplies available, and and which and how to uh, well how to work with modular cables for power supplies. Now another thing, there's no such thing as a power supply that is going to be too powerful. You can use a 1200-watt power supply in this machine that we just built, and it's probably going to be using no more than 200 watts at maximum load, maybe 250 watts. Uh, these power supplies are not 100% efficient. So, um, when you're picking a power supply, make sure that you are getting it from a reputable brand, which online is easy to get reviews on power supplies. Like I said, this is not a sponsored video by any means, but I use Corsair power supplies since they started releasing power supplies, and I have not had any issues with them at all. Even since the beginning. I forgot which model it was. It came out around Core 2 Dual days, which was 11, 12 years ago. And they started releasing their first power supplies, and I've been using them ever since. Now, I'm not using them exclusively. I can recommend Corsair power supplies, specifically this RM series, which is on the higher end, or the CX series, which is on like budget friendly but still good. You want to get a power supply that's at least 80 plus bronze. Uh, this this is going to be they're not that expensive. Like these can probably be had for 60 or $70, but you can get a same 550 watt power supply. Not the same, but you can get a power supply that's rated at 550 watts from an unknown brand for half that price, right? But you really do not want to do that because skimping on a power supply is an extremely bad idea. It can make your system unstable when you're playing games, for example, or using anything CPU intensive that requires any power. Uh, if the power supply fails, it could take your components with it, some or all of them, depending on luck, of course. So, skipping on the power supply is the last thing you want to do. So, a reputable power supply, I can recommend Corsair. I could recommend Seasonic. What else can I recommend? I'm not sure. I've used Cooler Master. I didn't have much luck with Thermaltake, although they do make power supplies, but I didn't have too much luck with them. They're not as reliable as I'd like them to be. I never had a problem with Corsair or Seasonic. And I'm sure there's other brands that are very reliable. So just check reviews, make sure it's something that's rated 80 plus, at least bronze, and make sure it delivers some appropriate amount of power for your specific build. Let's install the power supply. Now we don't have any opening on the top over here that's going towards the motherboard. So we're going to be installing the fan facing down, so it will be collecting air to breathe from the bottom and exhausting it out of the back here. And let's get these screws. Let's see, get some screws. I mean, we could use the screws that came with our motherboard, but I have a bag of thumb screws, so I'm just gonna grab some of these thumb screws that I have and use those. You don't need to buy extra screws. You can use the ones that came with your case. That's fine. I just happen to have these. That's why I'm using them. And it aligns perfectly. As a matter of fact, this particular case will not let you install the power supply the wrong way because there we go, manual focus. uh, because if you turn it over, the holes will not align properly. So let's put this screw here. I know they're thumb screws and I'm using a screwdriver, but why not? Okay, so they're hand tightened now, and I'll just tighten them about 30 degrees. So that way they're nice and snug in there. Hand tightened. Now, this is not aligned perfectly, so just loosen them up a little bit. Get it to align. There we go. And we can install this screw. Okay, here we go. Hand tightened. Will not go any further. Screwdriver. About, I don't know, few degrees. 20, 30. That's it. We have our power supply installed. Now this case has some basic cable management. We are going to be connecting the motherboard. Let me see where it is. Here. Let me bring this back into better focus. There we go. So, we will be connecting. We want to get this ATX connector out of this hole over here. So we'll put this in here. And this is the CPU connector, and it's going to be on the top of the board over there. Right there. That's our CPU connector. If you can get a better look at it. That's the connector. Where is it? There it is, right there. Ah. So this particular board has an 8-pin CPU connector and a 24-pin ATX connector. Some newer boards, more powerful high-end boards, use two 8-pin connectors. Some use even more, so make sure you get a power supply that could adequately power your board. Okay, we're connecting the CPU power and ATX power. Okay, let me get these out so they are not dangling in front of our case. Just pull them out like so, and be careful when you're laying it back down, so that way you're not going to crush anything on the other side. Now, the CPU connector, we could use the case cable management in order to make it a little bit neater. So we can just put it into this hole here that we have for cable management next to the where our CPU power from the power supply is coming, and bring it out on this side over here, so that way we have a cleaner look through our front panel. And are we connecting this correctly? Yes, we are. CPU power connector. And there it goes. Connected properly. So we have case fans. We are going to be using the motherboard headers for them. We have exactly 2, perfect for our case, because we only have 2. If you need to connect more fans, but you don't have enough headers, you could use these Molex connectors, something like this for your fans to power them. There's also fan controllers. You can daisy chain multiple fans to one header on the motherboard. I would not recommend doing that because you can overload that header and then the header would be dead. So there's no reason to do that, in my opinion. There's plenty of options to connect more fans, from that simple Molex connector to fancy fan controllers that are readily available. But since this is a very basic build, our case fan goes in there, the one in the back, and the one in the front. How would we connect that one? We have a case fan header somewhere around here. Yeah. So we could use our cable management that comes with our case. plug the case fan into this hole over here, and it will come out of the same hole where our ATX power supply connector comes out, and there's the header right there. Perfect. What else do we need to connect here? Okay, so we have our HD audio connector, so we'll see where our HD audio plug is. It's all the way in the back over here, so we can just route it here. And there's that hole, and just plug it in here. I want it to go on. How do I want this to go? Under the rest of them. There. There is no wrong way to plug this in. It only goes one way. If you're unsure where to connect it on your motherboard, you can check the manual. As a matter of fact, I'll check that right now. So you'll see what you're looking for. I have the manual here, and we have the locations of everything, and they're numbered. So number 14. No, that's number 14. These are the fan connectors. This is the USB 3.0 connector. I know you can't see it very well, but the most important one that we will be connecting shortly is the front panel connector, and I'll give you a better look on that one because it's not one connector, it's 4 separate connections. Now, next connector we want to plug in is our USB 3.0 connector. It is the worst possible connector. You gotta be very careful with this one because they're fragile and not very user-friendly. I've actually damaged one of these before on the motherboard end, so do be careful when you're installing this particular connector. So I'm going to just turn the power supply is get this in there. There. If in doubt, if something is not going in because there's another component in the way, remove it, do the cable, and you can put the component back in. Like this power supply was preventing me from letting that USB 3.0 connector go through into that hole on the other side easily, but it was still okay. But if it was just a little bit more tighter, I wouldn't have been able to, so I would have to remove the power supply in order to get this cable here through that hole. Now you can only connect this This, see if I can get some better lighting over here. Let's see if I can get some better focus also. That is the connector for the USB 3.0. If you can see, the notch is on the bottom. It's very difficult to see because the video is not the optimal quality, but you can probably see this little notch on the bottom. So this is going to go face down, and make sure when you are connecting it, it's not at any angle, because it's very easy to bend and break those pins that are inside this connector. I mean the part on the motherboard. So I'm gonna go ahead and connect this. And gotta be very careful. Okay, that went in perfectly without a problem. There, we are good. And we'll route this audio cable on the bottom of it, so that way the stiff USB 3.0 cable will hold it down. And there, it's just gonna kind of live here and not bother anybody. Next, this is gonna be a front panel connector. So this connector, it's important to show you. It's 4 individual connectors. We have the hard drive LED, the power LED. We also have the power switch and the reset switch. Now the polarity, positive and negative on these, is important. That's why we, the buttons, they're not important. That's why there is no positive and negative polarity on them. But the LEDs, they are important. So you have to make sure that you're connecting the positive to the positive on the motherboard and the negative to the negative. Nothing bad is going to happen if you get it wrong, and if your LED doesn't work, you can always just go in and flip it over. So we have our front panel connector here, and it's going to be facing you like this. This is how every motherboard manual I had, the diagram of this front panel connector is as if you're facing it straight forward, like this. So where is this thing? There. So that's how it's gonna go in. And on the motherboard, it is let me try to get a good view over here. It's right over here. Let's try there. That one next to the screw on the bottom. That's our front panel connector, and that's where we will be installing these connections. So we'll just route it through here. We have power LED on top, hard drive LED on the bottom, and then power button and reset button. So power LED, positive and negative, going in this way, and hard drive. LEDs in positive and negative. It's gonna go this way. And positive. After all these years, one would think that something would be standardized, but this has not been standardized. Power LED on top, hard drive LED on the bottom. So and this is the power switch here. And reset. Okay. There. Let me double check this. Power button. Okay. Power switch, power button. Everything looks good. And these are nice and tight. And so we have almost everything we need. Now, if this was an AMD Ryzen based, or not Ryzen based, an AMD AM4 socket AM4 APU, you would be able to use this DVI port and this HDMI port output to connect your video output on the monitor. But we are not using an APU. We're using a Ryzen 3000, Ryzen 3 1200 based on Zen 1 architecture. So it's not going to have an integrated APU. So we need a GPU, and for that we have a Gigabyte RX 570 4 gigabyte model. So we're just gonna install that over there, and screwdriver. Just go ahead and we're just going to, on this particular case, we have this little panel that goes up, and we need to remove two PCI slot covers. So that's ready. And actually, what we need to do is we need to loosen this, open this. Your case, unless it's an identical model, will have something different. This is just for this particular case. So we have this PCI Express 16X slot, and what we want to do is we want to take this little plastic piece and open it, and we are gonna install this card. This is not a new card, I'm repurposing it from a previous build, but it works perfectly fine. And for this build, it's more than powerful enough for the CPU. And where in the slot, we can just press it until the back little clip clicks, and then we could, oh, I can show you. We have the card installed. Take this little mechanism, it's not perfect there, so we can hold the card in place, I guess, until we put actual screws in. And we'll just use these screws. That's our video card, and that's where the screws go. Second screw goes here. Same rule applies. No over tightening it. Just 90 degrees after it's past the hand tightened state. I know it's a thumb screw, but I'll give it a little nudge with the screwdriver anyway. There. So we have one last piece until this is a fully functional computer. And that is those cables that I've mentioned for this semi-modular power supply. In this particular case, without adding any additional storage because we have our NVMe, we will add some additional storage to this later, but I want to keep this video, I want this to be the last thing we do on this video because we'll be adding storage in another video. So we're just gonna go ahead and plug this PCI Express power connector here. And there. And we have a hole just for that in this case, right up there. And there it is. There. Nice, neat, clean. No, not perfect, of course, but very functional. No obstructions in airflow in any way, shape, or form. So we're ready to pretty much power this thing on. We could do some basic cable management while we're here. It's kind of put this one over here and zip tie to these little things on the back of the case are specifically made for zip ties. So you can zip tie your. Let me grab a zip tie over here. Yeah, I got it separate. So you can take the zip tie like this, and you could just kind of tidy up. So since we're just gonna do a little bit of cable management, I mean it would make sense to make this big guy, this big cable over here, and what else can we tie to here to make it somewhat neat? This can like stay right over there. It's not bothering anybody right now. And there really isn't that much cabling over here. So I know there's a lot of people who want their cabling to be perfect, and there's nothing wrong with that, but from the functionalities point of view, if you don't, if you have a basic build like this and you don't have that much cables, um, you can just leave it like this and put the cover on. Let me show you. Like this is the back cover. Just leave it like this and kind of put the cover back on and screw it in, and you're done. And uh, screws. So we have our screws here. We didn't use any screws that came with the case, but that's okay. We have extra screws. So uh, here we have, yeah, there's really no real. I don't see the need to actually tie those cables down. Of course, if you want to be perfect about it, it is possible, and I will do that in a few minutes, but we have the case on, and from the front, everything's clean. We can put the front panel back on, and there it is. Thumb screwed in. Now I think now would be the perfect time to see if it powers up. So I will go ahead and get an HDMI cable and plug it into the capture card in the computer, so that way we can see if this actually boots up, and if it doesn't, we can do troubleshooting. I'll be right back. Oh, I wasn't even talking to into the microphone. I don't know if that recorded properly. So I have an identical machine over here, and Windows has been already installed on it. So we can see if this one that we just built from scratch boots into Windows. We will later go over how to install Windows on this machine, And all right, so let's first see if it powers on. Have a keyboard, mouse, and we can use the front panel. USB connectors. Well, in this case, they're not exactly front panel. They're on top of the case. Let me grab a power cable. So we have a little LED on the motherboard on, and if we power it up, press the power button, I think we can turn off this additional light. There's the light. This is the view from the top. This is here. What do we have? We have our dust cover that we took off before. Magnetic. Put that on top. I'm gonna remove these. Put this dust cover on the bottom. Okay, so let's plug the cables, monitor. There. Perfect. Where's that HDMI cable that I had before? New HDMI cable. I'll be unplugging my camera from the capture card and plugging this computer in there. But first, we see if it powers up. Power up. Lights on. Pretty quiet. And here we have some light that's coming from our graphics card and some from the motherboard. Now, I'll go ahead and plug in this cable. HDMI into the video card. And this part, I'm plugging the camera now. And let me go over here. Camera gets unplugged. There. And computer goes in. We might need to restart the computer. Yep, let's see. Hmm. There doesn't appear to be any output uh, to the graphics, to the capture card. So I'm just gonna try to connect it directly into a monitor to see if that works. Hmm. Doesn't appear to be any output from the graphics card, so we would need to troubleshoot a little bit. Connect the camera back in. And power it on. So maybe we try to reseat the memory module. Remove the memory module. Plug it in. And power it up. And it works now. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in HDMI. So, perfect. This is excellent because our memory module wasn't perfectly seated into the socket. That's a very common problem. So all you have to do is pull it out, plug it back in, and it works. So here is what we have. I'm Just grab that and unplug this camera and plug in the output from the video card into the capture card. Here we go. So, all right. Excuse me. Let's see. There. Keyboard, mouse. Get plugged in. And new CPU installed, of course. So F1. We get into this BIOS. And default. We can use the mouse. Load optimize defaults, yes. And save. It reboots. And probably needs a BIOS update. Okay, so I'm gonna just try to power it off. Power it back on. Let's see if it posts. Yeah, I mean, this is one of these things that come with the territory when building a brand new machine from scratch. Things that you don't expect could happen. Like what this is right now. We opened up a brand new motherboard. Some of the parts are not new. That I know that have been working without any issues. So this is definitely something with the motherboard. Most likely just needs an updated BIOS. So I'm going to open up the case again. See if everything is connected properly. I'm fairly sure of that. And we get a little bit of let's see. There it now posts. So I removed the memory module, plugged it back in, and it posted again. So might need to use some rubbing alcohol to clean the memory module because it has been laying on my desk for a while. There's Windows booting up, and there's our desktop. Mouse, perfect. So Didn't connect this thing to the internet yet. This is CPU-Z here. Ryzen 3 1200. See the motherboard. That's the motherboard we installed. Memory, 8 gigabytes, single channel because we're using a single stick. SPD, it's in slot 4. There's our settings. It doesn't have any XMP profiles. And our graphics card. RX 570. So that will be it for this video. And we are going to continue with updating and setting up the BIOS and installing Windows from scratch in the next video. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope this is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions, please leave any comments down below. Thanks for watching again.